from an execution and implementation perspective, remarkable, quite remarkable.
Fabulous. You know, I agree that, but in many ways, it's good because costs will come down with this. I mean, we were at a drop of a hat, we were in an aircraft heading out to some place. It didn't help our bottom line, frankly, with so much, you know, on added expense on travel and stay and everything else around the world that we were doing. So if at least now we'll be thinking twice for good or bad reasons that, you know, what is minimal travel. I think all of us will be healthier for that in any case.
Yeah, yes. I'm quite sure.
Just the thought that for 3 months, the word jet lag hasn't entered the vocabulary, you know, is quite interesting. Ashokji, when was your last trip out?
Oh, it's been.
You're asking me or Govind?
Yes, I'm asking you.
2.5 months back.
You were in DC, right?
I was in DC. Just came back in March.
Just in time.
Just in time. Otherwise, till now we would have been stuck there.
Right, right. No, and some of the stories of people stuck in places been pretty ghastly because those who had to stay in hotels when, you know, money finished and rather pathetic stories. Rukmini, how's it going for you? You're on mute.
Yeah, so, you know, 20 days of travel a month has come to 0. So that's a good thing, I think. But as an organization, we've learned a lot. I think it's one of the most steepest learning curves. We've been able to connect to most of the communities in which we work. And in fact, that reach has gone up in this time, which is kind of really interesting.
That's interesting because I've heard stories that, you know, people in the villages are having a hard time, no connectivity. So all this concept of e-learning, I mean, it's more like a concept rather than actually happening.
Well, you know, there is ease and there is ease. So we are using the smallest e, and we found that, you know, SMS. So we send small activities through SMS.
Oh, lovely.
And once parents get a sense of what is happening, then, you know, bhai ka phone, bhatije ka phone. I mean, then if you understand why this is happening, then people figure out. And as lockdowns have lifted, you know, we usually have children's groups in the village. So if anybody in the group has access, then they can get the. So it's not online. It's you're sending and you're getting back.
Okay. Okay.
So.
That's interesting. Sorry, Govind, I'm just chatting. So tell me to stop whenever you want. I'm just catching up with something I haven't been able to do and say hello to everyone. So
2 more minutes.
Sure. I'll actually say bye and disappear so that y'all can go live soon. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for doing this. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome back to the third episode and discussion session on points of no return, India's migration crisis, reflections and solutions. This is the third one. Like I said, the first one focused on, just to recap a little bit, the next 100 days where we talked about relief and rehabilitation as a response to the migration crisis that we were seeing unfolding across the country. The second session where we had a lot of experts, particularly from the non-profit world, who were working on ground, talked about building bridges. The big challenge of building bridges, ensuring and rebuilding trust with those who had to leave under obviously very precarious circumstances from mostly urban India into different parts of the country. The third part today focuses on the rural economy, and could there be a new rural economy blueprint which will in some ways rebalance some of the demand supply factors that led to the migration in the first place. And this is really a question. And the focus in all these discussions is to reflect and to provide solutions. So we have three guests today who are going to talk about these three, the aspect of migration and the rural economy from their vantage point. So let me introduce you to them very quickly in the order that they will be speaking. Dr. Ashok Gulati, who's the Infosys Chair Professor at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. Dr. Gulati is a Padma Shri from 2015. He was earlier part of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. He's also been chairman of the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices, Government of India, 2011 to 14. Around the time, I think, where he started his very articulate columns in the Indian Express, which we continue to read and almost devour today. Our next guest is Tarun Sawhney, Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Triveni Engineering. Now, Triveni is one of India's largest sugar manufacturers. It has 7 sugar mills in 8 locations in Uttar Pradesh and engages with over 250,000 farmers in cane marketing and development. So a very close on-ground perspective, but from an industry point of view. Tarun also is a past president of the Indian Sugar Mills Association and sits on several committees on agriculture and sustainability. And Rukmini Banerji, who is CEO of Pratham. Now, Pratham is a non-profit that is very well known actually for leading the annual Status of Education Report, or ACER as it's now better known as, which used to survey about 600,000 rural children for over 10 years. Pratham has also touched about 58 million children in their literacy and vocational programs in 21 states. Rukmini is a Rhodes Scholar from Oxford and also got a PhD from University of Chicago. And I'm Govindraj Ethiraj. I'm a journalist. I've been a financial journalist and now focusing on using data to tell stories and fighting misinformation. So thank you all very much for joining us. I urge you all to participate actively, leave your comments, ask questions, or narrate stories for that matter. And hopefully this will be an interactive conversation. I've already reminded my panelists that we are to treat this like a round table that we are sitting around. And not as a linear question and answer discussion. So please throw in your questions and comments and feel free. And each of our guests are going to speak for about 5 or 6 minutes from their vantage point on this theme. Like I said, is about reflections and solutions. So Dr. Gulati, let me hand this over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be on your show here. What I'm wondering is how to reboot the rural economy in the face of when there is a massive migration back to the villages. These people have come from mega cities of Mumbai or Delhi or Ahmedabad and other places, are not the ones who are totally unskilled. A larger part of them have some skills and they were not the poorest of the poor, you know, as we define below $1.9 per capita per day. They were somewhere above that, and they were living with dignity and with work and earning their livelihoods. Now when they go back, what are they going to do? There isn't much in agriculture. Already agriculture is saddled with, I would say, too much workforce. The latest data that has come last week is 42.5% of India's workforce is engaged in agriculture, when agriculture is contributing only 16% or so to the overall GDP of the country. So agriculture cannot take more load of these people who are going back to the villages. what are the options? In the first 100 days, some relief work, some cash disbursements or some support system, even Manrega could help. But if half of them even don't go back to their jobs, they are going to stay here and we have to find some productive jobs for them. One basic idea that I want to put before the audience is, I'm reminded of the Second World War and a major construction plan in Europe called the Marshall Plan that US launched to reconstruct Europe. Now, the Eastern India from where most of these people have come, take Eastern UP or Bihar or Jharkhand or the part of Chhattisgarh, Odisha and West Bengal, that's where the larger chunk of migrant labor had been going to the south and to the west, or even to the north. They are below all India average on all development indicators. Whether you take infrastructure, housing, sanitation, education, health, all indicators of development and social sectors, they are normally below the all India average. So I would suggest and submit that the government should think of a mega plan, maybe call it a Modi plan or Marshall plan or migrant laborers plan or whatever you want to call it. But,
Okay, I think we've lost Dr. Gulati for a moment. We'll wait for 10 more seconds. If he doesn't come back, Tarun, may I hand over to you and then we can come back to him later?
Sure.
Okay, great. So Tarun, why don't you take over and then we'll come back to Dr. Gulati the moment we get him back.
Sure, Govind. Let me just start off by thanking Kiran Pasricha and the Ananta Aspen Center for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to me, the revitalization of the rural economy. Of course, dealing with the migrant crisis takes precedence. It is front and center. It's something that we're facing today. One has seen it in my own industry, in my own businesses. We have encountered hundreds of thousands, lakhs and lakhs and lakhs of migrant workers. We have, in our own way, been able to support people. Very frankly speaking, the timing across North India was for wheat harvesting. And so there was ample opportunity, and then of course for sugarcane sowing as well, ample opportunity to absorb some portion of the migrant workforce into agriculture immediately, because there was a paucity of labor and this filled in. But it was a momentary respite. It was certainly not for the larger population that was actually migrating. And those are problems that we have continuing today, and I'm happy to share my thoughts about it. I mean, this session is really about how do we drive jobs and enterprise into rural India, and how do we manage aspirations. I think that's a very vital point that we need to consider. So, it comes back. Let me lead off from where Ashok Gulati was speaking. It also comes back to the Prime Minister's vision of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. And the concept is really on self-reliance. When we move towards a urban model, a rural-urban model, we have to look at self-reliance. And I'm not talking about Nehruvian import substitution, but I'm talking about a decentralized system. And rural India and the opportunity in rural India abounds. It abounds in the medium to long term. The real problem is how do we tackle the challenges in the short term? And in that, there is sufficient opportunity for administrative and policy reforms, especially that of our legal system. Now, there have been recent announcements of liberalization in the agricultural sector, and this is essential. Indian agriculture, again, leading off from the first speaker, has been dominated by two acts: the Essential Commodities Act and the State Level Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Act, the APMC Act. They're draconian in every possible way. They have prevented agricultural entrepreneurship. They have given sweeping powers to government officials to perhaps even imprison hoarders, fix prices, confiscate stocks, etc. We need to move away from that. And the steps have started. We need to empower local decision making. That is absolutely vital. We need to have a laissez-faire market, and we need to embrace that rather than having more of a controlled and structured economy. We need to have more access to open markets. We need to promote a national common market. I think that's absolutely vital, and it's a complicated scenario given our federal structure. Investment in agricultural supply chains and value chains is something that will automatically happen with the large number of people. However, that's a medium-term scenario. How do you get to that? How do you allocate sufficient capital? How do you raise skills to be able to employ the lakhs and crores of millions of people that have been impacted by this migration? And in all of this, my belief, I'm rather optimistic, is that the government's role is that of an enabler. It is to provide soft and hard infrastructure, including health, education, skill development, and to support industry in achieving all of these goals. But in going back to a post-COVID era, we have to think of the 70 to 100 million migrant workers that are landless. And how do they take advantage of the developments that have happened in India over the last 10 years and that will happen in the future? One point a statistic I'd like to throw out is that now 25% of rural income comes from non-agricultural work. That's a small statistic, but it is much better than what it was 10 years ago. It is a statistic that needs to change. If we are to embrace this urban infrastructure, urban economy, we need to change that quite significantly. Yes, the easy way is, we can absorb people into the agricultural value chain and supply chain by the creation of new opportunities, by the creation of new industries. We can also encourage corporate India to invest where the labor is. It's a very simple thing. It's happened the world over. People allocate capital to where resources exist. If human capital is available in rural India, the encouragement to actually go out and invest in rural India has never been greater, and it will certainly happen. There was a mention of Manrega. Now, Manrega, frankly speaking, getting the Manrega card just to qualify is something. It's a bit of an arduous task. So that process needs to be facilitated by the authorities very, very quickly. Yesterday, there was a bench of Justices Ashok Bhushan, Sanjay Kishan Kaul, and M.R. Shah, to the best of my knowledge, who gave an important judgment on how they would like the state governments to act upon this and embrace the migrant workforce and to allow the workforce that is still stuck in urban India to actually move back in a safe and secure manner. These are important initiatives. You need to have the administrative, the judicial arms of our government work together in a cohesive manner. Now, the challenge really, education, of course, has to happen. The provision of health is essential. The fact that the PM's vision is to give a home to every Indian, to have a toilet for every Indian, they will give rise to huge amounts of construction opportunity. And that, along with agriculture, will be the first two areas where you will see short-term opportunity. But the real thing that we need to see is reskilling. Who are the people that are going back? Okay, across Uttar Pradesh, we now have 11 locations. We deal with 170,000 people a day. And we've been in conversation with them because we're giving feedback to district and state governments in terms of what we're encountering on a day-to-day basis. And we're seeing a wide variety of people. We're not seeing necessarily unskilled laborers. We're seeing people who are Ola drivers. We're seeing gym instructors. We're seeing people who were working in the textile industry. We're seeing people who were working in tourism. They have certain skills. It's not as if the entire migrant workforce is a completely unskilled workforce, but it is about reskilling, because the opportunity, When you go back to your villages, the same people that are going back, the villages are very different. There has been some movement in infrastructure, gas, electricity, roads. There has been some development from when the very same people moved to urban India. So they will find more opportunity. It's a younger population as well that is migrating back to rural India. So we've got to bear all of these very important points in mind in terms of finding a solution. 1% of our GDP is spent on skilling. We need to raise that to 5%. We need to get corporate India to use CSR funds and the NSDC to work together in terms of addressing the skilling. And that is how we're going to build faith in the system, which is something that we're finding all around in this crisis today. Thanks.
Right, thank you for that, Tarun. So, Dr. Gulati, we lost you when you were talking about the eastern, the flow of migrants from Eastern India and the average level of income and prosperity. So, if you want to add something to that, because when we lost you, and then we can go on to Rukmini.
The main point is that construction activity is the one that creates a lot of jobs and can absorb the skills. And the best thing is to go for housing for all in the eastern region, front load that. You already have that program and go in a big way towards that. Along with agriculture infrastructure, if you can build, that will generate the demand for cement, steel, logistics and electrician and fitters and others. So that's the way that I would put. I think what Tarun had indicated is building supply chains in a business-oriented commodity by commodity manner, which will flourish if the infrastructure is in place. So you can build the business if the infrastructure is right. Otherwise, building business is doubly more difficult. So that's what I would suggest as the starting point for the next 2 years, at least.
Right. Okay. Create a massive demand surge in Eastern India and use construction as a driving force within that. Rukmini, Banerji?
I like the thought of this Maha plan or a mega plan that Professor Gulati has been talking about. And I don't know, Govind, if you selected the people on this panel, making sure that Tarun is from UP and I actually belong to Bihar. So we are perhaps the right people to be part of this conversation. So I want to just quickly highlight that we had some major problems even before the crisis happened. I recently heard Esther Duflo, one of the prize winners from the last year's Nobel Prize, say that the old problems, by the way, haven't gone away. So don't forget about the old problems. We have now new challenges ahead. And so coming from the point of view of young people, I would say that, well known, we have very high enrollment rates across even Eastern India. For the first time in the last couple of years, anybody who started school in first standard has actually managed to reach up to 8th. What this does is actually raise aspirations hugely for what lies ahead. And our aspirations are largely based on the path that you see other educated people have gone. And we did, as part of our USSR survey, in 2017, we took this age group, 14 to 18, and looked not just at what they can do in terms of their basic ability to read or solve problems and so on, but also looked at their aspirations. And across the board, anybody who has reached that age and is still in school wants a white-collar job. Now, that in itself, most of these people are not going to go through a very successful higher education or even a secondary education. The skills that you'll get at the end of it are not particularly at a high level, but your aspiration of yours and your family, and often these kids are the first to have reached up to 8th and beyond, is huge. So I think we have to keep in mind that there is that kind of on the vocational skilling side, we are known more for education, but we have about 30,000-40,000 young people who are getting through our vocational programs, all from a rural background. And the conversion rate, by the time you meet young people, talk to them about vocational skilling and how many actually show up at your center, is almost like 4 or 5 out of 100 that you talk to. So already this idea of getting skilled in this way, and then even though there is placement at the end of it, we had very high placement rates. Two batches from a women's organization. But even that, rural youth mobilization, and I'm talking about, the last couple of years, we never sent them to big cities, because for a young person starting out on a job alone in a big city is intimidating and very expensive. So a large part of our placement of young people was in, the organized sector, hospitality, healthcare, and so on, but not in Delhi, Bombay, or Calcutta, or Chennai. And interestingly, a large part of our success in our vocational skilling was coming from an Adivasi belt, from Chhattisgarh, from Jharkhand, from Odisha. Unlike Bihar, every Bihari has an uncle in every city in India. And therefore you can rely on, your kin networks to get you there, and informal support structure in the city that can support you. But if you're coming from Chaibasa or Simdega or, other tribal areas, you don't have that connect, and therefore you needed a connect to go and come. So this is where we were. And I think that the mindset, I think in human capital, we focus a lot on skills and capability, but there is an aspirational angle, and there is a where do you want to go to? And after years of not having enough education, everybody wants to go to a destination which actually didn't exist then and certainly doesn't exist now. And even our skill pathway, I think, was being built thinking that young people want to go through vocational skilling, but most don't. So where are we today? If I look at the villages, that I know well, large numbers are coming back. And as both of you have said, Tarun and Ashok, that these are not people, who are completely unskilled. They're coming back and their aspirations have been hit badly. And so it's sort of, you had a certain kind of life in the city, you've come back and, you left for a reason, and that reason hasn't gone away. UP particularly has almost 50% of rural children in private schools, low-cost local private schools. Those are going to get, I think, hit quite badly, which means there will be a surge of enrollment back into government schools in a government school system which is already strapped. And so really the challenge is, yes, there are a lot of medium and long-term issues, but immediately in the short run, what can you do to productively use people who are there? I was talking earlier to a colleague and a friend, Yamini Iyer at the Center for Policy Research, who's done a lot of work on school finances. And we were working out, and we need a little bit more time before we can actually come up with numbers. But if you had an annual maintenance contract of 15 schools in your cluster or across a few panchayats, you could actually, can you make a living out of that? Can this be a viable thing? Midday meals are cooked in every school in India. Usually they are cooked by, women. It's not a particularly well-paid enterprise, and you have to economize with the grains that you get. But it's a huge task that happens every day, and it's never been looked upon as a way to build a skill. In the same village, when there is a Neota, there is a Barat, the people who are cooking are men. And so, can something be done on the job, things that you have to do anyway? All schools have land, some land, and many schools that land lies vacant. Is there a way that you could be a group of young people who say that I'm going to plant vegetables in your piece of land, give a portion to the school and a portion for us? I mean, what are the ways immediately that we can use skills that people are bringing back, provide opportunity right there? There are a lot of education and, livelihood surveys. But, for example, what does a panchayat need? How much construction normally happens there over a period of, let's say, a year? How much is likely to come in? I think there's going to be an increased need for planning, mapping, and assessing. Everybody is saying rural enterprise, young logon ko entrepreneurial skills sikha do. But entrepreneur to do what? How many? And how many beauticians can you have, or how many plumbers can you have in what kind of area? So I think that very quickly, even in the short run, some very quick assessments of what can, a particular region, one panchayat, 5 panchayats in Bihar are quite big, actually afford, and how much money comes in through a variety of different schemes. So I think along with the mega plan, there needs to be a maybe a panchayat level plan to say कि अगले 1 साल में क्या-क्या होने वाला है, and to what extent can the people who've come back actually help in executing some of that. NREGA only allows certain kind of activities. But in the COVID period, could NREGA be opened up for actually allowing a wider range of kind of rebuilding activities that are, that may be required? If enrollment goes up in schools, rooms will be required. Do those all have to be done by the PWD, or can they be done by, people who are in the village? I mean, I think there are local ideas that have to be collectively organized to think about the resources that come in and how can they be better used.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm getting a sense that all of you in one way or the other are talking about bringing in the solutions at the rural end and finding ways to occupy, through vocations and otherwise those who are returning. The previous discussion where we spoke to, two nonprofits, including Ajvika, who does a lot of work in migrant labor. And we also spoke to a Bombay-based low-cost builder. He spoke about what he would do or his firm would do to bring people back and the better conditions that he would now provide once people start coming back, because he will need them, as would most of the construction industry. So I don't know whether there is some kind of, I think conflict is too hard a word, but divergence in these points of view. So let me put that first to you, Dr. Gulati. So how are you, is this going to work and move seamlessly? Finally, it's going to depend on where the demand pressure is. And if urban India is going to create that demand once again, because construction particularly, which is the source of most of migrant labor, is going to resume, and people will actively start, enticing people back, or maybe they won't even need the enticements.
This will have to be seen, that how many people go back to Mumbai or to Ahmedabad and others, because to tell you very frankly, India has failed in treating them the way human dignity needs to be treated, whether it is the
Right. Okay. I think we are facing internet connectivity issues here. Okay. So we've got lots of questions coming in as well, but I do urge you to keep throwing in the questions. Rukmini, let me come to you. So you've talked about the focus on, the panchayat. I mean, this is the flip side of what the builder in Bombay was telling me. They say, okay, create the grand plan, the Maha plan that Dr. Gulati spoke about, build it up and create capacity at the panchayat level. So any example or illustration that suggests to you that this is possible and how it is possible, particularly for this surplus labor that we are now talking about? You're on mute, Rukmini.
I don't know much beyond schools and Anganwadis, but I see that these institutions which exist need to be strengthened, need local partnership to strengthen them, and not only money that comes in from the top. And what kind of each of these places, the reason I gave these examples was, each of these places, a large amount of food is cooked every day. The food can always be better. Somebody cooks it. Whoever is cooking in the morning can actually do some supplemental income. Otherwise, maintenance of school buildings is a real problem. These may be very small things, but I think it is a time at which, and perhaps it's happened somewhere, I'm not sure. We are going to try some of this midday meal upskilling of women and see what does it cost and how can it be done and what can they do if they have the skill. Winning back a contract from a Bharat, caterer may be difficult, but I think that this kind of, how can you enhance people right now while they are doing things. On the children's front, this aspirant, I've been very worried about this, how the aspirations from education is actually going to depress the fact that, very soon, after a couple of cohorts going through and people realize there's nothing at the end of 10th and nothing at the end of 12th, along the lines of what you thought. So can this crisis right now be used to actually expand not just learning for school, which is what our entire education system does, for more education and more education, but expand it a little bit broader to look at, what I call learning for life. So, for example, how much plumbing do you really need to know if you're in 8th or 7th to be able to make sure that your school water and toilets function well? I'm not a plumbing person, but one can figure that out. What are the things that while you're young and while you're in school, right now, for example, every migrant, and I can talk about Bihar, for example, I was in a village in Sitamarhi. And in that village, at the time that I was there, this is sometime a couple of months ago, there were people who had visited, in that village, there was the experience and the exposure of visited 20 states. And there was a discussion to say, ki, yahan ki Anganwadi itni kharab kyun hai? And people said, I've been in Manipur, it's not so bad there. I've been in Tamil Nadu, it's not so bad there. Now, all this experience that people are bringing back, even for the time being, how can it be used to improve what is right there? Most people who are coming back have digital skills. Perhaps those who are not left also have digital skills. But can we say that by Diwali, everybody which has returning migrants makes sure that in their entire village, people know at least, efficient navigating using a smartphone for, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. I mean, I think these are all opportunities. They may not create livelihoods, but they may create these other things that migrants are bringing back that are of value to the community.
Right. Dr. Gulati, I'll come to you in a moment. We lost you again, of course. Tarun, can you kind of walk us through from a slightly more macro view, what to you is looking like the demand supply of quality or skilled labor, particularly in the context that you're dealing with them? So if you're, let's say, engaging with 250,000 plus farmers, what could the COVID crisis have created, either in terms of those who are already there and or those who will now come and join them? And is that something that's good for you, or do you see this as an opportunity, and how do you see this playing out?
So Govind, that's an excellent question. I am naturally optimistic, so I think I'm going to look at the brighter side of things. There's been enough talk about the great negativity, which is absolutely true, and the great pain and suffering that exists today. The one thing I would like to say before I start answering your question is that it is now incumbent upon every state government to ensure that all BPL families get access to food through the public distribution system. There has been never a time in our nation's history where the PDS and the efficacy of the PDS has been more in question. So we will see. But yes, coming back to your question, I think there's tremendous opportunity. I think that there are 3 or 4 things that I would suggest and advocate. The first point is perhaps a little more controversial. I think there are enough government-run agencies, the railways, for example, innumerable NGOs that are working and assisting the migrant workforce in terms of going back, leaving urban India or leaving states in South India and come back to the north and the northeast of our country. Now, the bulk of this workforce does have identification papers. Large quantums of people do. When they go back, they are carrying, I think first, a large portion are skilled as well. We need to capture information on where, which district, which village carries certain extra skills, because the dissemination of that information will also bridge the gap between rural and urban India. It will allow corporates to actually go out and seek skills. It will also allow corporates and the government to work towards constructive reskilling in certain parts when you know what skills exist. Otherwise, if you're not able to capture this entire movement of semi-skilled or unskilled workforce from urban India back to rural India, it's going to be a huge challenge. So I would suggest that we come up with some innovative schemes about data capture. It will serve us very well in our planning phase. The second thing that I would say is that there's a huge opportunity again for state governments to allocate common land to the migrant workforce. We have lakes, we have other portions of land that are under government control that are considered common land. Some of this common land we already have squatters, okay? That's a reality. But there are large tracts of common land across. I know this for a certainty in Uttar Pradesh and in Bihar, okay? But I believe it exists across the country, Jharkhand, many other states. The opportunity to allocate those common lands through innovative models, again, is incumbent on the state government and will give rise to short-term opportunities in agriculture. The third thing I would say is what was very successful, and I was noticing over the last couple of years, is a lot of work that organizations like CII have done through their skilling initiatives, etc. The mobile training centers in Jharkhand, they were small initiatives over the last 24 months, but extremely effective in terms of providing skilling and reskilling capability to local communities. This needs to be broad-based.
Right.
So those are the opportunities I'd like to mention at this point.
Right. Okay. So let me take in a few comments and questions. Balveer Arora says, I think to your point, Tarun, migrant labor was either exploited by contractors or abandoned by employers when they ran into rough weather. Do you think states from where they originate should play a more proactive role in securing stable employment contracts and benefits for them, ending their unorganized and informal character? Another question and point to you, Tarun, is distributed manufacturing, which is taking manufacturing away from urban, semi-urban areas to rural areas. To begin with, maybe ancillaries of a big manufacturing company as an anchor customer. Development, infrastructure, and skill sets dedicated to a particular industry can be done by anchor customer out of CSR funds. Okay. Yeah. Say Maruti developing facilities for steel and iron casting in West Bengal. Surinder Makhija. Does this sound sensible to you, Tarun, as a business person?
I think both points are very reasonable. You have to now invest locally in decentralization, in decentralized manufacturing, because that opportunity certainly exists. There was a lot of talk about Indian manufacturing. Let's say the 90s and early 2000s, Indian manufacturing gained a lot of importance because people thought that there was a cost advantage. Then over the last 10 years, we felt that this cost advantage was lost, also in terms of the efficiency to our neighbors in Southeast Asia, etc. I think this gives rise to a huge opportunity. To the first point, in preparation for this talk today, I was actually having a look at the laws of our country, and I didn't know that there was an act called the Migrant Workmen Act of 1979 that existed. This and 13 other labor laws were subsumed by something called the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code of 2019. I want to mention that this code left out a very important section on migrant workmen. Now, I think that the first thing that needs to happen is that this code needs to adopt a new section in the next session of Parliament on migrant workmen, because safety and security is absolutely paramount.
Right. Just a quick response, since most of your workforce and your operations are in UP. So, what's your reaction to the new labor code? I mean, which is really bringing everything down to three codes for 3 years.
So my reaction is it's positive. I think any change to our very draconian labor laws are positive, as long as you ensure safety and security and you ensure that there is dignity in the workplace. That's absolutely vital, and that's the kind of role that the government has to play as an arbiter rather than an enforcer.
Okay, I mean, that's not the subject for today, so I'd love to question you a little more. So, okay, question for Dr. Gulati. Why is there no focus on technology adoption at farm level to help improve yields, productivity, manifold, specifically for small and marginal farmers that can both provide significant jobs for tech-enabled build-outs as well as significantly improve
technology, income? I would say, has penetrated even in marketing. Even today, if you look at Bihar, wheat is being sold anywhere from 1700 to 1850 rupees per quintal, whereas the SP is 1925 rupees a quintal. So the problem is, if they don't get a good price for their produce, then they are not fully encouraged to go further in technology adoption. To create a basic demand in the economy to reboot the system, I think there are two ways. One is a dole mechanism. Manrega is largely a dole system. Cash transfer is largely a dole system. Now, this is good enough for 2 months, 3 months, but we have to move from dole to a development model. We are lagging behind in development in this region, which creates development but also creates income for these people, which will generate demand for the industrial goods. This is how industry will flourish. It's not a question of supply side. the larger problem, we are in a recession because the demand has plummeted. So we need to revive demand. And how do we revive demand? And the best way is a development model like the, the great recession in US. Roosevelt came up with a new deal at that time to build massive, infrastructure for US. I think the same thing we need to do for Eastern India.
So the 20 lakh crore program that the government has unveiled steadily and in many phases is not an answer to any of this?
Well, I think I was talking to the chairman of NABARD. The first biggest thing is 1 lakh crore for agriculture infrastructure. I think if you look at many of these programs, some have been in existence, some can be beefed up. It takes a hell of a long time for the money to be released in the system. Many of the earlier programs are lagging behind. A small example I will give you. There is a program from top to total, tomatoes, onion and potatoes, building value chains to all vegetables. 500 crores were allocated back. It was Arun Jaitley who announced that program. So far, if you look at the website of Ministry of Food Processing, which is anchoring this, only 3 crores have been released out of 500 crores after 2 years. So the question is, if we have to do this massive job of the number of 11-point program that FM outlined for agriculture package, we have to front load in a big way. And I would go for major infrastructure build-up and housing to start with. I think this is where my hopes are as a part of the strategy for development.
Right. Okay. Rukmini, back to you. Rajendra Bahuguna says the major issue is the quality of education as there is little focus on learning. The ACER report or ACER report itself brings up these disparities. If we use simple technology for classroom learning, the youth could be better qualified and productively employable. Any reaction on that? And then I'll come to the next question.
Yeah, I think that, one thing that this last couple of months has shown us is that one category of people who were totally left out of the education system, largely from, say, government schools, was parents. And at every level, starting from the elite all the way down to a parent of a child in a primary school, has, if possible, used technology in some way. We, in Pratham, for example, have been sending out these SMS messages to almost 11,000 villages. And we find, depending on what level the activity that you're sending out at, we get a lot of response from parents. So we've learned that parents can play a role. It's very different from when you are in a city and your child is attending a Zoom class versus you get 167 character and you're able to actually respond. But our tracking studies are showing that parents, once they feel that this message is for them and for their kids, and at that level, it can work. So I do think that governments also have been trying a whole bunch of things. Obviously, these last 2 months, people have been scrambling to do what they can. But coming out of that, there needs to be a digital layer, whether it is through basic phones, whether it is radio, that actually assists parents who are often not very educated themselves to be able to help their children. So I don't think, e-learning is a very big word and online education is all big words, but I think that there are examples from what governments have done and others have done in smaller bits during this period that has proven to be surprisingly promising. And we must build on those.
Right. So digital skills for parents, and this is a good time to emphasize on that. Okay, back to you, Dr. Gulati. So a question from Rahul Banerji. He says, it is some states which produce more agriculture production and depend on migrant laborers like Punjab. But if we see most of the 80 districts where migrants have returned from cities are in UP, Bihar, Bengal, etc., to your point earlier. So do you think overburdened agricultural workforce in these states can accommodate some of them at least, or half of 1.6 crores?
Going back to UP and working in agriculture, or going back to Bihar and working in agriculture, they are already overstaffed in agriculture. As I said, we should be at present about 30% of workforce maximum should be working in agriculture. We are 42.5% of our workforce there. So we need to pull out, but not push. The thing is, pull and push factor you need to pull them out to other sectors to higher productivity, higher income. And that depends upon what your skills and what the demand of the rest of the economy is, right? This has happened all the world over. Problem is in Bihar, UP, the holding size is so small. And if they're, less than 1 hectare, I mean, normally it's 0.6, 0.7 hectare. Now, if they have to support a family of 5 or 6 people, it's impossible. The land cannot give you that unless you're growing grapes or lychee or something very high value with higher risk and higher capital that is needed. So I don't think there is much scope for agriculture to absorb, but building agriculture value chains into the system and linking urban India with rural India. If you look 10 years ahead, 600 million people are likely to be in urban areas and they need to be fed. And we don't have proper supply lines built. So this is where much employment can be generated, building commodity by commodity value chains and supply lines into the game. It requires physical infrastructure, it requires logistics, it requires different type of entrepreneurship, which revolves around post-harvest technologies into the marketing and processing, food processing side, rather than agriculture per se, the traditional one.
Right, and as you pointed out in our conversation just yesterday, that if they do work in agriculture or come back, the household farm income will only drop further.
That's right.
Right. So, okay. So a couple more points. This I think is aimed at. So let me read the question. I think in Maharashtra there is a class of workers who move from place to place to cut sugar, and I think the question is. Okay, I think I've lost the question. Yeah, but essentially the question is, can these people be better compensated or managed, Tarun? This may not apply to you, but maybe it would be useful for you to tell us, how do you deal with the farmers that you engage with for cane marketing and development? Sure.
I think when you're faced with a crisis like the COVID pandemic, there's all sorts of innovation that happens. There are points in history which have always come up with the best and greatest ideas, and they've come out of crises or points in pain. In our very, very small way, it took us a total of 72 hours to go completely touchless. We contact 170,000 people a day, and a lot of them change from day to day. And in 72 hours, we were able to go completely touchless. So we were able to ensure safety and security of everybody in our supply chain and in our value chain. And this happened through very quick technological development, through using mobile phones, which every single farmer of ours has, every single farmer. Okay, and we stretch all the way from Muzaffarnagar to Gorakhpur. So we're covering the breadth of the state of Uttar Pradesh. And very honestly speaking, that is why the control and the participation of my firm in terms of ensuring that the spread of COVID was prevented through contract, through regular business transactions, that's how it played out. Many other firms followed suit as well. Now, in this leap for embracing technology, it was the state government which had to play a role in terms of giving permissions and authorizations. We still have all of these laws that prevent us from looking and harnessing modern technology and looking forward in terms of enhancing development. My particular view.
What's an example of? What's an example of? You mentioned draconian law several times. So give us one illustration. One law that you would see, you would like to see gone immediately, if that was possible.
So I would like a complete reform of the APMC Act.
Okay.
It's been on the cards for a long time. It is deeply political, and I understand exactly why it's not done, including and the Essential Commodities Act as well. They were placed at a time when food security in India was absolutely paramount. Today, we have lakhs and lakhs of quintals of food grain that rots in government godowns. We have poor supply chains and value chains that don't allow fresh produce to arrive at marketplaces and to be purchased by consumers. And there's a lot of wastage across the system. This is well documented, and I won't throw data out at you, but there's ample talk about this. Now, the fact of the matter is, the moment we actually try and look at this from a 2020 perspective and the next 10 years in terms of mobilizing supply chains and looking at connectivity between rural and urban India, we will need to change all of these laws because they create hindrances rather than promote capitalism. And that is what will employ a large number of the people that have been actually forcefully made to move back from urban India to rural India.
Right. So we've got 10 minutes more, and I'm going to come to you soon, very soon, for sum ups. Now, Dr. Gulati, a couple of questions. Do you think without the state's goodwill, contract farming can make benefits for farmers? This is Charu Jishnu. She or he says that farmers doing contract farming from West Bengal under PepsiCo have received 890 rupees per quintal, which is less than the traditional variety. As West Bengal, we have not implemented the Model Contract Farming Act, and the win-win framework failed. Gurdeep Singh says, with the relaxation of the draconian provisions of the APMC, farmers can bypass the, I think he means mandi, directly to food processors in food parks set up in rural India and deal directly with food processing organizations, in turn with food processors and food parks, set up in rural India. Can this not lead to large employment in processing while reducing wastage through spoilage of fruit and vegetables?
Yeah. The government of India came up with the ordinances, 3 ordinances on June 5th. One is trying to liberate the Essential Commodities Act. The other 2 relate to APMC, and they haven't called contract farming, but broadly allowing contract farming. These are the 3 laws. Now, I think the movement is in the right direction, except perhaps one caveat in Essential Commodities Act. There is a clause they have kept. If there is an extraordinary price rise, then the stocking limits can be reimposed. Now, this little clause has the potential to undo all the reforms in the agriculture marketing system. Most of the other things I'm reasonably comfortable with. Since the 2003 Model Act of, during Vajpayee period on the agriculture marketing reforms, we have not succeeded. And that is because it was a state subject and so on and so forth. Now, when the center has taken it up and brought out ordinances to create multiple channels for the farmers to sell to different people. Mandi system is there. If they want to go back to the Mandi system, they can keep doing, but also open up other channels. Now that has a potential to give him a better deal, building better infrastructure. People can come build their own commodity value chains, and it is between the farmer and the buyer how the things will unfold. I look at it more like what happened in the milk revolution, where farmer producer organizations at that time, the milk cooperative societies were made. In today's world, the FPOs will be, coming up in different states, and major buyers will be buying from the FPOs and investing in the basic infrastructure. So that will create a lot of employment into that whole system.
Right. Right. So can I add to that very quickly for a shorter answer, because we are now running out of time. Dr. Gulati, shouldn't we create, DK Agarwal asks, shouldn't we create large labor-intensive special economic zones in these areas where agribusinesses can be provided with better facilities, inputs, and consistent labor laws?
The question of labor-intensive, vegetable production is a labor-intensive thing. But you have to be competitive also, because you have to find out the market. Now, if after filling up your stomach, you have surpluses, then you should be able to export outside. And that's what requires building proper value chains, and supply lines have to be put in place. So I think just looking at, labor intensive, our cotton industry, whole from growing cotton to garments, can be a very labor intensive thing, but we haven't built up that thing. And Bangladesh and Vietnam have taken better advantage than we have taken. became the largest producer of cotton in the world, and we were the second largest exporter of cotton in the world, but we did not work out on the garment side and the fabric side and the yarn side. So it's the competitiveness and then inclusiveness. Both have to go hand in hand together if we want to do something good for the country.
Okay, right. So let me get a few sum ups now. We've got 5 minutes more. So, one of the points, I mean, we've looked at the, let's say, the demand supply, but I think one aspect that we've not touched upon so much is the point that Rukmini raised about aspirations. That every child who they've talked to, and obviously they've talked to the most in this country, wants a white collar job. And this is something we know as well. It's only perhaps a hard sample or a survey that's supplementing it. How does all of this square with aspirations, and how does this, I mean, obviously aspirations are going to slow down or decelerate thanks to COVID, but it's not like they will go away. So how does all of this square, and what would be your, as we've done with the reflections, your solutions in a context of meeting people's aspirations, creating better incomes for them, and obviously giving them a safe and secure livelihood, whether it's in urban India or in rural India, but rural India in this case. So do you want to go first, Tarun?
Sure. I think managing aspirations, it's a very long question, but I'm just going to focus on the first portion, which is the management of aspirations. I think it falls completely in line with what I was saying, building a system of social trust. And there has to be, and we have to look at quick wins. We have to look at all the low-hanging fruit that is available today. And there isn't very much because we're still battling that crisis. And therefore, at this point in time, it's about providing safety and security to the migrant workforce. The moment this crisis abates, the virus abates, we then have to look at opportunity. And I'm just going to throw out two sunrise industries I believe exist emanating from this crisis. The first is bioenergy. As far as rural India is concerned, the spectrum of bioenergy is so vast and can employ so many lakhs of people that is a sector, provided we have some amount of stimulus, etc., in terms of demand that is created. That is a sector that can do extremely well, employ a lot of people. The second, something that I've talked about quite a lot in my discussions with organizations like Niti Aayog, etc., is a concept of smart agriculture. We've talked about, when we talk about agriculture, we always talk about the denominator, okay? Burgeoning population that's involved, etc., etc. We really need to look at the numerator. We need to look at technologies. We need to look at opportunities that allow that numerator of productivity to increase. And therein lies a great scope as we have more skilled people that move back to urban India, a younger workforce. We will find creativity and employability in that. Thanks.
Okay, Rukmini, over to you.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, we've known from before that we have some very basic problems with sort of foundational learning. The government and their long list of Atmanirbhar Bharat has announced a national mission for literacy and numeracy, foundation for literacy and numeracy. Fantastic thing. I think this is something that we've been wanting to do, and let's use this opportunity from COVID to do so. There are a lot of educated people who've come back to the village. And therefore, can 2020 be the year that you're able to use the excess skilled people in the village who have the basic literacy and numeracy to be able to work with kids who are coming back to school after a big gap? So, whether you do it out of, community feeling, or whether Narega can be tweaked to say, can 2020 be the year in which we make a major dent in one of major India's problems? Two other quick things. The returning migrants also provide possible role models. Yes, they've come back now, but the reason that every child in rural India wants to be a teacher or a doctor or a Fauj mein jana hai is because that's who you see around. So can schools pick for every day of the week after they open to have someone come and talk to the children about what is possible, what opportunities lie out there? And finally, I think that if we agree that there is going to be need in the future, not jobs that people are going to give you, but things that you're going to have to do together, then we need to start in school of kids doing things in groups, potentially kids doing things that can be of benefit to the community. We've had some very good examples of this in our Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalayas, which are the residential schools, to say, identify a problem as a group of 5 kids, identify a problem that the village has and figure out a way to solve it. Incredibly creative things are coming out from kids who are in 7th and 8th. But you need to inculcate this mindset early to say that I can solve problems, I can do things as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Rukmini. Dr. Gulati, last word.
Well, aspirational India and aspirational rural India, I would say. A good thing is that you have the labor, you have young labor, and they are going to eat more, they are demanding more. They are looking for more action in terms of higher productivity. And this is where creating, 75% of India's infrastructure is yet to be constructed. If you look at 2030, every year we have to create one new Chicago. So this is a massive potential to absorb all these skills. At present, these skills are very much informal. You can certify, you can grade them and map them and where they are. But I think my last point is that think big to create demand in a development mode and focusing on Eastern India. That's the way to go and create good for the country, and regional inequality also will be tackled through that.
Right. Thank you all very much for your points. Like I said, this is the third of third session of of the migration series. We called it Points of No Return: India's Migration Crisis, Reflections and Solutions. The first 2 parts talked about the first 100 days, and the second part talked about building bridges. And the third one, as you can see, throws up the interesting demand opportunities and the demand pressure that we can create. The good news from this is that even as we saw from the second episode, the people in urban India, the demand creators or the traditional demand creators will now improve their act. We can now see equally if there is sufficient spending in the grand East India investment plan, or whatever way you want to call it. If there's sufficient pressure, the opportunities and the choice for the migrants, at least in theory, will be lots. And given our continued education focus, we are talking about educated, skilled and reskilled people with the right digital skills, not just amongst children, but also amongst older people, taking a great step forward in this post-COVID world. And that's a good note to end on. Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions, for your participation, and staying through. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.